And a few years ago, we built this beautiful facility called the Anvil Center, which is a ultra modern icon that sits right as you head into Columbia Street, and it contrasts very, very positively with the historic history of New Westminster. We are on the unceded territory of the Kakite and the Coast Salish peoples. Chief Rhonda Larrabee sends her greetings, could not be here today. Also, we have two members of the provincial legislature here, which are Aman Singh, Richmond Queensborough, and Jennifer Whiteside, both newly elected this term. And she represents New Westminster Mainland. And then we have Member Parliament Peter Julian, who represents New Westminster Burnaby as well. And they all send their wishes to this event. I have a couple of proclamations. One is a letter from the Prime Minister. Dear friends, I am pleased to extend my warmest greetings to everyone marking Global Meetings Industry Day. Global Meetings Industry Day offers a wonderful opportunity to highlight the important role of professionals in the meetings and events industry, what they play to our communities. Their expertise and skill ensure the success of conferences, trade shows, and business meetings held across the world. It continues to be a challenging time for planning and hosting events. That is why I would like to commend the organizers for their hard work in making this year's gathering virtual so that it could still take place. I am certainly that everyone in attendance will enjoy this opportunity to discuss key issues, reflect upon past accomplishments, and set goals for the future. Please accept my best wishes to a memorable and rewarding Global Meeting Industry Day. That is from Prime Minister Trudeau. And on behalf of Mayor Jonathan Cote, I'd like to read the proclamation that we passed at the last council meeting, which is Global Meeting Industry Day, April 8th, whereas Global Meeting Industry Day is an annual global advocacy day, shedding light on the value of the meetings of people, businesses, and communities. The meetings industry as a whole has a real impact on the economy of local business and residents in the city of New Westminster. And whereas internationally, the meetings industry creates hundreds of thousands of jobs, generates billions of dollars in revenue, and supports communities around the world. And whereas hosting an event, conference, meeting, convention, or trade show stimulates this region's economy by bringing in new visitors who eat in our restaurants, shop in our neighborhood stores, and bring new revenues. And whereas GMID 2021 is a time for the City of New Westminster to reflect on the importance of the meeting industry and what it has provided for the community, as well as spotlight the need for industry relief from the COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas the City of New Westminster supports the meeting industry, now therefore be it resolved on behalf of Mayor Jonathan Cote and the City of New Westminster, I hereby proclaim April 8th, 2021 as Global Meeting Industry Day. And those are my comments. And I want to thank Vala, and I want to thank her especially for how she's been able to keep this facility running and keep our people employed, keep our intellectual value of our people working in the community, so that when we start up, we're on the ground and we're ready to go the second that COVID-19 is lifted. So thank you, everyone. Have a great event. Come to New Westminster soon. We'd love to see you. Take care.
Hey, thank you very much, Councillor Puckmeyer. I'd like to introduce Walt Judas, our first keynote speaker. Walt has been a valued advocate and promoter of the tourism industry for over 30 years. Walt leads multiple advocacy and policy files, sets the strategic course for TIABC, builds relationships with members and industry stakeholders, and communicates the value of BC's visitors economy to various constituents. Walt's integrity, inclusiveness, the fact that he truly cares about us and our industry, his knowledge and communications expertise confirms his work for the industry is more important than ever. As we prepare to restart, having Walt and TIABC supporting, strategizing, and communicating the industry needs is absolutely critical. Walt?
Thanks very much, Val. Good morning, everyone. And I'm really partial to the meetings and events sector in particular because I started my tourism career actually working in the sector. Norman Stowe, our next speaker, hired me at BC Pavilion Corporation back in the 80s, and Norman remains a good friend and mentor. And I had the pleasure of working with Val. So thank you for the invitation today. And it's always great to connect with people in person. At my time at Tourism Vancouver, I spent 15 and a half years working directly with the meetings and events team. And Dave Gaisley and his crew there, very much still a force in our province for hosting meetings and conventions. Claire Smith at the Convention Center, of course, was part of the PAVCO team way back in the day. At PAVCO, I worked in a division called New Business Development. And our job was to create, execute, and then ultimately sell events that filled our facilities, namely BC Place Stadium, the Vancouver Convention Center, TradeX, which Val, was part of the startup team there, as well as the Robson Square Conference Center at the time. And of course, now in my role at TIA BC, we do host a major conference every year. This year it was virtual like all other conferences, but we hope to be back in person at some point, hopefully next year in Prince George. Now, one of the things in my role in advocacy that I get a lot is recommendations and or questions, and it's from a variety of stakeholders, including government, media, obviously our members, just different people in our industry that are concerned about what's going on with tourism and hospitality, particularly since we've been stalled over the past year. So I'm going to present some context for this presentation by answering some of those questions, or at least informing you on what those questions might be, and then what we as an organization are doing about it from an advocacy perspective. So firstly, one of the questions that I get all the time is when tourism begins to resume again, what do you think people will be doing? Do you think tourism will come back with a vengeance? And that's a term now that I'm starting to hear more of. What is it that people miss most about being locked down for all intents and purposes? What is it that they miss, doing that they haven't been able to do over the course of the past year? Well, one only needs to look at this survey by Insights West that shows what people miss most about being in this COVID environment. Most BC residents miss visiting friends and family. So it stands to reason that when the travel restrictions are lifted, that's what people will be doing. For myself, I know I've got 3 kids that live elsewhere. They live in different cities, one as far away as Saskatchewan. And that's something we're looking forward to doing, is getting together at some point when travel restrictions are lifted. 89% of us miss eating in restaurants. We've had that opportunity, to be sure, and we're now shut down yet again. But at the same time, most people are looking forward to getting back together in that environment, which is very much a part of our culture. Most people miss traveling in Canada, and I'm sure elsewhere, as you can see, almost 80% want to travel or miss traveling outside of Canada, particularly during the winter months. And 72% miss going to concerts, theaters, or other performances. And I would count meetings and events in that category. They didn't have a stat specifically for that. But on the other hand, I would suggest that just being able to gather, and it's nice to be in this auditorium, even though there are only a handful of us, but it brings back those feelings about being able to get together and gather in those particular settings. Another question that I'm asked about is, what about pent-up demand? How quickly will tourism come back? And aren't people keen to travel again? Of course they are. We all know that. We've seen what's happened over the course of spring break as people have basically ignored some of the directives or orders by the province and traveled to visit family and friends or traveled to different regions, etc. But here's an interesting stat that most people believe the Canada-US border will reopen for regular travel at some point this year. Some of us are a little bit more suspect whether that will happen or when that will happen, but nonetheless, if that happens, you can see about a third of people intend to take a vacation outside of Canada. So that is part of that pent-up demand, to be sure, but at the same time, it will take a while to build back up again. I'm also asked, what are the projections? What's the future for tourism look like? What do you see in the as far as a new tourism environment when things begin to return to so-called normalcy? Well, we'll never be in a new normal, or we'll never be back to the old normal, I should say. It'll be a new normal, and it'll have some things that we need to consider. I talked about this pent-up demand. You can see one of the points here is that international tourism will be slower to recover. I recall when the pandemic first struck and we were about 4 months in, people thought it might have been over by that point. Then as it extended, we recognized that perhaps the recovery was somewhere between 12 and 18 months. Now that we're a full year, we're talking 3 to 5 years before we see the kind of levels of tourism that we experienced in years past. But they're a projection. Nobody really knows for sure. Every projection out there is wrong until it's proven. But nonetheless, we know for a fact international tourism will take time to recover, and especially if we don't see borders open this year. I recall back in the early 2000s, and you'll remember 9/11. After 9/11, one of the top 3 factors for people deciding where they wanted to travel was health and safety or security. That became one of the elements that people looked at anytime they wanted to visit a destination for either pleasure or for business. After a number of years, that wasn't high on the priority list. There were many other factors that influenced where people were wanting to travel to. Well, now with COVID and the extended projections around the pandemic and what we're faced with in future, that is again elevated to probably one of the top 3 things that people will consider when they come back to a destination like ours. What are the health and safety protocols in place? How seriously are they taking them? How are they enforcing them, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing that we're going to see for the foreseeable future, it's really all we have now, is that domestic and outdoor tourism will remain heightened in the short term. That's pretty obvious with the travel restrictions that we have in place. No question, this is really the only option for people at the moment within British Columbia, in our own region. Ultimately, we hope to expand to other regions, then allow people from other parts of Canada, and then ultimately be able to welcome back international visitors. But outdoor tourism, similar. Some sectors of the visitor economy actually excelled over the past year, golf being one, camping, boating, many of those outdoor recreational activities that people could enjoy within their own backyard. Go into a Canadian Tire and see how many bikes are for sale. Cycling has seen a resurgence. So it stands to reason that this will be with us for the foreseeable future. So let me transition here and talk about some of the priorities of TIA BC over the course of the past 12, 13 months. Really, these haven't largely changed. In fact, we're still very much working with all levels of government to focus on these priorities. However, the timing might change somewhat. In fact, right now, we're considering things like provincial orders and the travel and gathering restrictions. But ultimately, these are pretty flexible and fluid, but we spend most of our time on these issues, layering on some other things that come up because of government directives or things that are happening on the pandemic front. So I'll talk about these very briefly as I go through, and again, pose some of the questions that I've been asked to give you kind of a status update of where we're at. One of the things that we hear lots about, and we have recommendations from members about ways to approach government on this notion of travel restrictions, or as it came up a couple of months ago, travel bans. What is happening with these restrictions? When will they be lifted? To what extent will they be lifted? Will, in fact, they be added to? In other words, will they get more restrictive instead of less restrictive? But one of the considerations as government is making a decision is, what are residents feeling? And you can see with some of the stats that you see here, there is still great worry or fear by locals to welcome people into their communities from other parts of the province, other provinces, and particularly internationally, as you can see by the stats here. So half the people in New Westminster don't want people from Burnaby or Richmond or elsewhere within the Metro Vancouver region. And you can see a third of people throughout the province would only welcome people from other parts of the province, or I should say would welcome people from other parts of the province, but fully 2/3 wouldn't. So there is still great trepidation by residents to want to welcome people back into their communities. And now we've seen what's happened in the last couple of weeks as the variant has taken hold and COVID-19 cases are spreading around the province. So I would suggest the next time that a survey takes place, asking residents about their sentiments toward visitors, these numbers are likely to go up, which doesn't bode well for our sector. Now, in spite of all that, we still need to be speaking with the province very diligently about a tourism relaunch plan. In other words, when we can start to see the restrictions lifted, what that would entail, what the criteria would be around that. And we've made those overtures now. In fact, we sent a letter to the province earlier this week, Taya BC and my colleagues at the BC Hotel Association, saying to the province, look, these are some things that we need. We want to collaborate with you on a specific tourism restart plan to ensure the next phase of pandemic management and reopening proceeds as smoothly and productively as possible. And what we wanted to follow up on was the report from the Tourism Task Force that came out in early December that identified a number of actions that government could take, many of which have been implemented, but focused also on what a recovery outcome might be, or successful recovery might be, for the tourism and hospitality sector. And there were two main things: safe travel protocols to restore confidence for tourism staff, travelers, and communities that host visitors. And the second, that tourism can continue to support quality of life for BC residents. And within these objectives, we're asking to work with the government on a partnership to create a tailored plan for the tourism industry that includes a balanced, risk-based approach and creates a roadmap for government and the sector, a restart plan that will lessen the uncertainty associated with sudden shifts in protocols and openings and closings. And let's face it, businesses need some form of certainty to begin to plan for the months ahead, let alone next week. Developing clear and specific milestones for the coming months, outlining the conditions that need to be present to allow business operators to have a clear and transparent indicator to help with planning, and then collaborating together on evolving safety protocols along with lifting restrictions so they can be implemented efficiently and in a way that enhances general confidence, and then a joint communications plan to support a restart plan in order to restore traveler, community, and business confidence. Those are elements that are extremely important to our industry. Nobody is suggesting that we open the border tomorrow or that we lift the travel restrictions tomorrow or even next week. We recognize, and the industry has always supported, what Dr. Henry and the province has put forward, but at the very least, we need to be absolutely planned and prepared for when the time comes that the restrictions are lifted, or that we can work toward the criteria to allow those restrictions to be lifted so that our industry is ready and prepared to go. And that's particularly acute in the meetings and convention sector, where you need long lead time as well. And it's not like flicking a switch. But within the tourism relaunch plan, we want to focus on some of these areas. You will notice close to the bottom, events and festivals and business meetings, etc. This is part of the discussion that we want to have with government going forward. And those are some of the elements that would be included in a joint communications plan. So we're working with government. We're talking to government about this, and we have some meetings upcoming, and we look forward to seeing some progress in this area very soon. Bella, I'm counting on you to keep me on time. So another thing that I mentioned in that list that of TIAB BC priorities that we were looking at earlier is provincial orders. You've seen this one. You're familiar with this one that affected pubs and bars and restaurants. This happens on a fairly frequent basis as the province manages the COVID-19 crisis. And as I mentioned, the uptick in cases and the impact on the healthcare system, et cetera. So they're collecting the data and instituting these orders, oftentimes though, without the notice that we require to mitigate the impacts or to make the adjustments within our sectors to inform our members and to try to deal with what the impacts are. The province did form what's called an industry engagement table. And the purpose of this industry engagement table is to receive occasional advance notice of these public health measures and to provide some guidance or talk about the impact or potentially even consider other options for the province to move forward with. Now, we've gotten together on a number of occasions. Unfortunately, these orders sometimes come so quickly, we don't really have a chance to absorb what the impact might look like or even provide the feedback in a timely fashion to both government and our industry. But nonetheless, this is an evolving engagement table. We're looking for ways and suggestions to make it better so that we can be more effective for our industry, and certainly government has a better understanding of what the ramifications are anytime these orders are issued. Now, it's not only tourism and hospitality. I'm a part of it. Many of my sector association colleagues are a part of it, but so are other businesses from around the province. But in effect, this is a good step by the government, but we need to get better at providing that feedback and hopefully mitigating some of those impacts. I'm asked very frequently about the meetings and events restart plan. You know that a work group got together over the course of several months and worked very diligently on producing a restart plan to allow the meetings and events sector to start up again in a graduated way. You can see what the benefits are of our industry doing it versus another private event of some kind of personal function, et cetera. I've just cherry picked some of them that were included in that restart plan. But we submitted this to government a few weeks ago, and to date, we haven't had a response by either the PHO or anyone within government. That's not to say it's lost in the mix, but certainly there are other priorities than looking at gathering restrictions or easing gathering restrictions. But nonetheless, this was an exceptional piece of work that was done that would allow a phased in approach for gatherings of up to 50 to begin with, then perhaps doubling to 100 over the course of 30 days. And we would have regular assessments. It would be extensively monitored. There would be reporting procedures, all the things that professional conference and meeting organizers put in place as part of their events. They do it like no other. And in fact, I've witnessed it here at the Anvil Center, and the protocols that are in place would be in place for any meeting of any kind organized by professionals. And so that's what we put forward to government under Section 43 of the Public Health Act, which allows the province to consider variations in their orders based on new information and based on health and safety protocols and a number of other factors. So we're hoping to hear back very soon and at least work towards trying to get our sector back up and running again, because it has been decimated and will continue to be unless we can put some markers down that allow the gradual reopening. So we're working very diligently to move this forward with government. I did want to acknowledge and take the time to talk to the M&E work group members, or the meetings and events work group members, led by Joanne Burns Miller, who was an outstanding leader, corralling all of us, putting the report together with all of the folks that you see on this list. They did a tremendous job meeting very faithfully and compressing the timeline as best as possible, but put together such a thorough plan that there are other provinces and territories around the country that have looked at this as an ideal model. The advisory group members as well should be acknowledged for their role in also helping the work group put this together. I noted too, we often speak to government about some things that that other jurisdictions are doing. And on the meetings and events side, I think this is really important. I saw this the other day from a meetings publication that in Nevada, they increased meetings, conventions, entertainment venue, and large group gatherings capacity to 50% last month. And it also announced, the state of Nevada announced it'll streamline the process for submission and approval of large in-person gatherings. When we see those things and we take note of all the follow-up work that's done on any of these large gatherings to show the efficacy of the health and safety protocols, et cetera, that bodes well for moving our sector forward here on the meetings and events side at some point soon, as long as we can communicate that information effectively to the province. So moving on really quickly, because I know I'm encroaching on time, I'm often asked by media, in fact, it comes up every week, I'm contacted frequently by radio and television reporters, what's going on in tourism, and especially after a new order is issued. Where are businesses at? How many businesses are still able to open their doors? There's a tremendous amount of research that has taken place by different individual sectors collectively around the province, around the country. You can see with this chart how tourism spending in Canada by internationals and also by Canadians was steadily rising, albeit a few blips when there were things like the SARS outbreak or the global economic crisis, but it essentially fell off a cliff during COVID-19 for obvious reasons. In our sector, it's normally 21.5 billion. In British Columbia, we'll be lucky to have hit 7 billion by the time we collect all the numbers for 2020. But I'm asked, how are businesses faring? What is the status of business? And you can see here, 66% of businesses, so virtually 2/3 will close if they don't have government support in the not too distant future. And of course, that's factored in or layered on because we don't have the movement of people. The travel restrictions are still in place. So the longer the travel restrictions remain, the higher this number will go. You can see that a quarter of businesses can't keep up with mortgage payments. 17%, and I think this number is rising, are behind on property tax payments. In fact, there are some hotels, for example, where their property taxes are 5 times as much as the revenue they achieved last year. How in the world are they going to pay those property taxes? So it's certainly something we're working with government on. Nearly about 2/3 of businesses have used the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to stay afloat. Had it not been for that program, most of those businesses wouldn't have opened last year and likely wouldn't open this year. What we're pushing for is to extend the wage subsidy program to the end of the year, not merely until the end of June. Let me share a story with you, if I may, because I talked about liquidity at the start, or you saw it on the list. There's a place in Smithers. It's called the River House. It's a restaurant. At the end of March, because of new provincial directives, they closed their doors, and they're not sure if they'll open again. They've been around since the early 80s. Some employees have been with the company for 12 years. There's one that's been there right from the start. Having that restaurant closed is a huge blow to that community. It's not only to the restaurant itself and the employees. They have an annual wage collectively of about $500,000. Food and liquor suppliers will lose about $750,000 this year in orders. There are local maintenance companies, repair contractors, they'll lose about $50,000 in annual support. And there's others that are a part of the whole supply chain for just that one little restaurant in Smithers. They have no idea whether they'll be able to have the means to reopen again. That's but one example of thousands of tourism and hospitality businesses that are affected around the province because of the restrictions and because they don't have the support that they need. So we're working with government at all levels to find that kind of support that will allow these businesses at least to pay their operating expenses until they're able to welcome guests again. One of the things that we've done recently is submitted a proposal to the federal government as well as to the province on a program called the BC Tourism Recovery Investment Program that targets more of the large operators that also sustain many of the smaller operators by extension and an enormous ecosystem to allow them access to grants to continue meeting their operating expenses, but also loan programs that they haven't yet qualified for or haven't received, or they don't meet the criteria, but a guaranteed government secured line of credit or a loan program in the range of up to $25 million. We're talking about the major operators, major attractions, transportation companies, hotels and resorts, some of whom are already highly leveraged already, but they need access to these working capital grants or loans to be able to survive, especially through a second year. You know, the province offered some funding for tourism back in the fall. You can see the breakdown here. We are anticipating that there will be further relief measures in an upcoming budget, but I want to speak to the bottom point here. That is the small and medium-sized business recovery grant, which was expanded to include about 100 million for tourism. If you haven't applied and you're an individual business, you need to apply even if you don't meet all the criteria. That money is starting to flow, but not to the extent that's expected or needed. Government extended the program criteria or application process through to the end of August. We've worked very closely with the province to try to adjust the criteria to allow more businesses to qualify and receive the funds. We're not quite all the way there yet. In fact, we've got still a couple of things to work on that hopefully we'll see some action by government. If you're if the majority of your business is not owned by a BC resident, in other words, it's 51% Alberta resident, 49% BC, you won't qualify for this. Yet you may be set up in BC, hire BC individuals, pay BC taxes, etc. So by rights, we think this is one of the areas that could be adjusted to allow more businesses to qualify. In the interest of time, I'm just going to move on really quickly. I just mentioned the budget upcoming on April 20th. We provided some submissions to Treasury Board for evaluation, including the BC TRIP program and others. We still require, though, further measures that don't include specific liquidity, i.e. loans or grants, etc. These are things that we need help with. We've gotten some help over the past year, but these are all fixed cost expenses that all tourism and hospitality operators would have, or at least part of them would have around the province. On the adventure tourism side, they pay things like Crown fees. There are lease payments to the Crown, utility payments, employer health tax, property tax. Those are all costly to individual business operators, where we could see, or what we hope to see, is either a reduction, deferral, or ideally a suspension of any of those fees over the course of the next year, particularly for those sectors that remain idle because they only cater to international guests. At the federal level, we also provided a budget submission. The 3 points you see here are the areas of focus. Canada's hardest hit businesses is still in crisis. This is a national campaign that has many more elements to it that include these areas here. We're in great support and have been behind this campaign as well as an industry association in our province. But we do need additional support for things like the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which I mentioned, the HASCAP program, which is a good loan program for businesses, but it caps out at $1 million. We're looking for the federal government to extend that to up to 25 million. And so these are a number of areas of focus. In fact, yesterday I met with almost 36 members of the Federal Conservative Party talking about these very things that they can advocate on our behalf to the federal government. Some actions that you can take and a way forward: send your MP a letter. This is part of the hardest hit campaign at the federal level, that it compels them to include specific tourism packages as part of the federal budget on April 19th. It's imperative. The federal government has done many things, offered many programs to be sure, but they don't meet all sector needs. And some are still left out, like the large operators and the airlines, et cetera. But please take a moment. It's very easy. In fact, there's a template letter that you can use that's on TIAC's website that will be very helpful. But send your local MP a letter and let them know that tourism needs help. The other thing that you can do, and something that we've introduced with our sector colleagues, tell us your story. These are stories that we want to share with elected officials, like the one that I just talked about from Smithers. And in it, include what your business background is, how long you've been around, the ownership structure, your primary customers, are they locals? Are they from the region? Are they internationals, et cetera? Your revenue base, et cetera, et cetera. Get as detailed as you can possibly be. We're going to aggregate this information. It won't be shared other than with your permission to government, so that we can really illustrate what is happening in our industry and how not only businesses are affected, but people are affected, in particular employees, business owners, and communities at large who no longer have those services or suppliers that they're counting on, and certainly not the supply that we need for our sector in order to restart and welcome people back to British Columbia at some point. So I think I'm on time here. The last thing that I would do is compel you to contact me for any further information, anything that I've talked about today, or if you need to reach me to provide a recommendation, ask a question, I'm happy to speak with you. Send me an email, text me, phone call, whatever works best for you. I think the more that I hear from members and stakeholders in our sector throughout the province, the better I can advocate on your behalf. And so as well, when you're talking about our industry, use the hashtag tourism counts as we build momentum toward a recovery at some point. Know too that the meetings and events sector, it's one of the things that we talk about regularly with government. It's one of the sectors that has been shut down along with cruise and many others. It's vitally important. And on this Global Meetings Industry Day, as Vali said at the start, while it's not a celebration in that term, it does draw attention to the needs of the industry and the thousands and thousands of people in our province that have been impacted by the fact that we can't get together personally in beautiful venues like this and all over the province. And we look forward to that day. But it will take collectively all of us to work together to make that happen. So with that, thank you again, Vali, for the invitation. Really appreciate being here. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you very much, Walt. We appreciate your insight into what's been happening a bit in the background with the government. Next, I'd like to introduce Norman Stowe. Norman is a managing partner with the PACE Group, and he's one of the most skilled and sought after public relations practitioners in the province. Norman's creativity and ability to immediately clarify what needs to be done are two of the things I've truly admired over the past 30 years. Norman's expertise in providing strategic communications and issues management advice, developing comprehensive communications plans, and his many years in the meeting and events industry ensures that Norman will provide us with the tools we need to communicate the industry restart. Thank you, Norman.
Thanks very much, Vali. We wiped this wall just in case you licked it, so we're good. It's a pleasure to be here today, and particularly as we celebrate this Global Industry Day. And as much as it's important for this industry, I want to make special mention of this facility and Vali and her team. We're all hoping as an industry to get back to work as quickly as possible. But places like the Anvil Center, which are typically great community meeting spaces, are being used these days as official vaccination centers. So today at the Anvil Center, over 1,000 people will actually get their vaccination. So to Vali and her team, doing that practical work that gets us back to business faster, thank you very much. And I know there are facilities like this all over our province that are chipping in so we can get back to work as quickly as possible. The meeting and convention and special event industry that we know today in British Columbia got its start back on July 4th, 1987. As many of you will know, 1986, we had a World's Fair in British Columbia. The world came, it was hugely successful. The year after, we opened the Vancouver Convention Center, which during Expo was actually the Canada Pavilion. And when we opened, we did a lot of consumer research among potential meeting planners and buyers and so on. We went to Washington, DC, we went to Boston, we went to Texas, Houston, and so on. And we wanted to know what they knew about Vancouver. And it turned out that we were genuinely surprised when they told us that Vancouver and Victoria had the same level of awareness among meeting and conference buyers and organizers across the United States. And when we asked them why that could be, I mean, we had just had a World's Fair, we were a bigger city in Vancouver, we thought we were more famous. How did little old Victoria get to be the same level of awareness as Vancouver? And without a word of a lie, to a person, they all told us they knew Victoria because every day at 2 o'clock at the Empress Hotel, they served afternoon tea. That was it. That little point of difference made all the difference to those meeting and convention planners. And so we had a lot of work to do to catch up. And all of you know how successful this industry has been over the last 34 years. And then all of a sudden, we get to 2020. And Harvey Mackay is a business author and a columnist, and he really summed it up here for those of us who are looking to get out from under COVID and get past 2020. Learn from the past, but don't live there. 2019 is never going to come back. It is never going to be exactly the same industry that it was in 2019. It's going to be different. It has to be different. On March 12th of last year, there were 53 cases of COVID in our province. That was enough for the provincial government and Dr. Bonnie Henry to shut down all non-essential travel. And a few days later, as you might recall, the border was actually closed. Jump ahead to March 2021. That same day, there were 106,000 cases of COVID across British Columbia. Little did we know back then that in March 2012, with just 53 cases, how this would impact us. And in fact, just to show you what the good old days looked like, the health order for that day said that not only was non-essential travel canceled, that all events of over 250 people had to be canceled. How many of us would love to be able to do events today of 250 people? We had no idea what the next year was going to be like. For our industry, it was scorched earth. It actually, as Walt showed you in his graphs, it stopped immediately. It didn't even take a matter of days or weeks. It was instant. And our business was one of those that was hurt. We, in addition to our communications business, we also organize conventions and conferences. We also do major public events like the Vancouver Santa Claus Parade that attracts 300,000 people to downtown Vancouver and sort of kicks off the Christmas season. That was canceled. This little shot here is important because in March of last year, there were three things that happened that in any other year wouldn't have been connected. On the surface, these three things had nothing in common, but in 2020, they had COVID in common, and that connected them all. In March 5 to 7 of last year, the Pacific Dental Conference at the Vancouver Convention Center attracted 15,000 people from British Columbia, the United States, and across Canada. Those 15,000 people became what many of us now know as a super spreader. If you recall back to that event, you'll remember that there were people that were sick 3, 4, 5 days after that event. And that was really a signaling point for the March 12th announcement by the province. But just a few days after that dental conference with all those 15,000 delegates, there was the Canada Rugby Sevens matches at BC Place Stadium from March 7th to the 8th. 40,000 people attended most of those games. It was not considered a super spreader event. And people wondered why. Well, we'll get to that in a quick second. This little picture there is very personal to me because on March 14th, my family, 25 of us, had booked that house in Scottsdale, Arizona. We had paid $36,000, which is a lot of money until you divide it by 25 people and spread it out over 8 nights. But still, it was $36,000. So we were supposed to go on holiday on March 14th, the start of spring break, like many of you. And then March 12th, everything changed, everything was canceled. And what these 3 events had in common was COVID. The Pacific Dental Conference became known as a super spreader. Rugby 7 didn't. Why was that? The dental conference was located in the Vancouver Convention Center, a confined space with even smaller meeting rooms. Not only did they meet in small rooms, they ate together. They were also older. And when they went home at the end of the day after the conference, they didn't actually go home. They went to their hotels because they were mostly out of town delegates. And so that spread going out into the community like that was even more impactful. Then you had the Rugby Sevens. There were 40,000 of them, but they were younger. BC Place had plenty of room for them to roam around. They ate at kiosks in various parts of the stadium. They didn't eat together. But more important, when those games were over, they went home to their homes in Surrey, in Richmond, in Burnaby, in Vancouver. And so the spread, if there was one, was limited. They weren't going back to public spaces like hotels. And so that was a big change, and a lot was learned from that in actual fact. This quote here from Chip Rogers from the American Hotel and Lodging Association. Oh, what am I doing here? Yeah. This quote from Chip Rogers basically sums up our industry. While you're going to hear some disturbing things over the next few slides, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And that light comes in the form of a vaccine needle. And that is what is going to save us, and it's what's going to save our economy, and nothing else. It doesn't matter about Vancouver's mountains or the ocean or the rivers or our great restaurants or our great hotels or great places like the Amble Center. That vaccine is what is going to save us. Just to show you that there is some light at the tunnel, shares in Airbnb are up 20% over the same time last year. Same with Expedia, up 30%. Airlines like United and Southwest, their shares are up. Hilton, Marriott, and other hotels, their shares are up. There is optimism, as Walt said, in this industry. We know that the world is going to come back and they are going to want to meet. But these are some things you need to know. In 2021, this is the year of recovery. It's not going to be a full recovery. It's going to be partial, and it's going to be later in the year. And expect to start carrying some sort of vaccine passport. And that is becoming a discussion point at every level of government all over the world, that we are going to, at some point, have to acknowledge who got vaccinated and who didn't. And just to prove the point, in Sweden and Norway, they are already starting to look at seriously creating those vaccine passports for their people. In New York City, right now, in the last few weeks, they have been able to have at entertainment venues 100 people inside and 200 people outside. But if you can prove that your guests have taken a negative COVID test and passed, and if you can prove that they have been vaccinated, the government of New York City will allow you to increase those numbers by 50%. as Walt talked about in Las Vegas. So you can go from 100 to 150 people inside and 200 to 300 people outside, but only with vaccination proof. And that's going to become a hallmark, not just for this industry, but for everybody. It's going to be a huge and tough and uncomfortable conversation because there are people who will not get vaccinated, and they will, unfortunately, start to feel left behind. And that goes for airlines and restaurants and conventions and meetings, and it's not going to be avoided. Right now, 40% of decision makers will choose their next venue and their next date within the next 4 months. And this is information from meeting planning experts in the United States. So most of these people will make their first decision about their next destination and their next date by the end of April. So things are being done quickly. Decisions are being made quickly. Vaccines really are going to be the only thing that will allow in-person events. And the faster we can do it, the faster we can get back to business. Also, virtual meetings like this and virtual events like this are here to stay. Not necessarily the way we're doing them today, but they will be part of in-person meetings in the future. They're not going to be on the back burner anymore. We are going to use this technology in our meetings and conventions to do a lot of different things. One of the things that we have learned as a meeting and convention industry, and for those of us who do these things every day now, is that people are going to go online, not for networking, but for content. And that's critical. The other part of this is that the hybrid, the meeting and convention that is mixed, partial online, partial in person, is also going to upsell in person. In other words, if I'm at home and I'm watching an in-person event and I'm seeing other people there, I'm seeing them enjoying one another, I'm seeing that it's safe, that is an upsell for me to go to the next meeting in person. And so that virtual meeting is an important part of getting people to go to in-person meetings when the time is right. The one area where virtual has not worked is when it comes to exhibitors. Exhibitors have not found enough traction or enough leads when it comes to virtual meetings. And so that is going to be a tough sell for anybody who is in the exhibit business. The exhibit business, the trade show business really is about in-person and in-person relationships. The other thing that we have to do as an industry is customization. We are going to have to tailor our events and our meetings and our venues even more. Do not expect for the customer to change. We're the ones that are going to have to change. Also, attendees are going to wait until the last minute to decide to go somewhere. We've all experienced that. We all know that hopefully later this year, we may be able to travel, but I think very few of us are actually going to book and pay much more than a couple of weeks before we actually go. We want that certainty, and people who are looking to come to a convention or a show or an event are going to want the same thing. So they are going to book closer and closer to those deadlines. And I know that drives all of us in the meeting business crazy because we like the certainty. We like to know what those numbers are, but we're not going to get that certainty the way we did back in 2019. And also you can expect if somebody's in the healthcare business, they are going to be among the last people to want to go to an in-person event. So you're going to find the automakers, for instance, the people that have something to sell who are part of that industry, much more malleable about coming to an in-person event than someone from the healthcare sector. They are going to be among the hardest group of people to convince to come back and do in-person meetings. It is a whole new world for those of us who are in the business. And whether you're a meeting planner, whether you're a destination marketing organization, we have become or will become destination stewards. And this fact that, how is your facility and your destination collaborated together to make things safer? Because that is going to be one of the things that meeting and convention buyers and special event organizers are going to want to know. Today, 4,000 people in the last 24 hours died in Brazil. Does anybody really think that Brazil is going to bounce back when it comes to meeting and conventions? No, not until it becomes safe. And so we have to understand that as much as those mountains and those restaurants and those venues are important, that safety of individuals takes paramount. It is going to trump absolutely everything else. We are only going to want to go places where we feel and know we are safe, period. And the sooner we all understand that as an industry and make that a priority, the better we're going to get back to work, the faster we're going to get there. As travel stewards now, rather than travel promoters, we will be faced with something called radical localism. In other words, go back to March of 2020. How did you feel the first time you saw an American license plate on your street, knowing that they shouldn't be there? And that just compounded itself over the last year. Canadians do not want the border open. We don't want foreigners coming in and landing at YVR. Vancouver Board of Trade had a presentation recently from Tamara Vrooman, the head of the airport authority. She had it at noon. She came, she brought a picture that she took at 10:38 in the morning in the domestic terminal at YVR. It was empty, completely empty. No staff, no people, nothing. She said they get about 4,500 people a day through the airport now. That sounds like a lot, but YVR typically does 55,000 people a day. We are in no hurry to get back to the old ways of travel till we know that we are absolutely safe. And when that travel comes, it's going to be an uptick in regional and drive-in markets. In other words, Vancouver can expect to see people from Kelowna and New Westminster and Prince George faster than we'll see people from Seattle or London or Paris or Buenos Aires. That radical localism is going to take hold for quite a long time. And if people do come to visit us, they are probably going to be more local than foreigners. There is a greater concern for personal health. And two things here, and this is why I showed you the picture of our home in Scottsdale that we had rented. The fear of getting stranded and the focus on payment and how do we get refunds, that's what I went through. Like thousands of other people, I worried, what if I had gone on that trip? What if I had taken my family, all 25 of us, to Scottsdale, and suddenly we were stranded? Or we had to quarantine for 14 days, so that an 8-day vacation suddenly became 3 weeks instead of 1 week. So the people going to these events are going to be worried about their health. They're going to be worried about being stranded if something happens. They're also going to be worried, can I get my money back? It took me 8 months to get my $36,000 back. It took letters and phone calls, and ultimately it took a Yelp review about the place I was going and the people I was renting from. And it was very targeted because I focused not on everybody, but on Canadians who I knew went down to Arizona to book these houses, to go for spring break, to go in the winter. And I basically said, I feel like I've been held captive and so is my money. 2 days later, I got my money back. But it took 8 months to do that. So imagine a meeting buyer, a meeting planner or organizer, how they feel. I want to be someplace safe. I don't want to go someplace that's not healthy. God forbid I get stranded there. I can't have 15,000 dentists stranded someplace. And I want to know what your policies are with regard to bookings, payments, and refunds. And that's something that everybody, hotels, theme parks, airlines, we all had to get used to and understand how to do this better. We have to be more friendly and more pliable and more nimble when it comes to those things, because nobody wants to put up, in my case, it was 36,000, but what if it was a convention and it was 360,000, which is not unusual? Are we going to get our money back? Are we going to be safe? Are we going to get stranded? Those are practical things that we as an industry have to deal with. We also have to learn to pivot and assess as we go. We have to revise and rethink our destination brands. There's no point in putting out the pretty pictures of the restaurants and the mountains and the water if you're not safe. If your COVID numbers are wrong and going in the wrong direction, do you honestly think that those are going to be a secret? So you've got to rethink how you market your destination and your facility. You've also got to prioritize the ease of processes. We sometimes get lost in a wasteland of paperwork when it comes to organizing events. And that goes for everybody. It goes for the event organizers, the venues, the municipal governments who make rules in certain cases, the provincial and federal governments who make rules in certain cases. We have to make things easier for people, because the easier it is, the faster they will come back. And if you've got a very restrictive refund policy, don't expect people to do business with you. They want the surety of knowing that if something happens and it's not their fault, like COVID, that they are going to be able to get their money back. We're also going to have to learn in the next few months as we reopen that we'll be reopening with fewer staff. A lot of people have been let go, they've been furloughed, they've gone to other jobs. So there's a lot of places that are not working at capacity. That means the people that you've got are going to have to be nimble. They're going to have to be multidisciplinary. They can't just do one job. They're going to have to learn to do 3 jobs, at least in the short term, till we get back on our feet. Bob Freeman, Bob Priest-Hecht, who runs Freeman, which is arguably one of the largest meeting and event and exhibition companies in the United States, readily admits there is no substitute for face-to-face. Virtual is great, but I'm now sitting in a room that's meant for 250 people, and there are 10 of us here. And it's hard to have a conversation when you're 6 or 10 feet apart and your mouth is muffled. As people, we want to be around other people. So it's only natural that we want this industry to go back, and so do our customers. Digital events will be there. They will be there for reach. In-person events are going to be there for quality and depth. And the fact is that in-person events are going to become exclusive. That means that they are going to be smaller for many, many months to come. Only the best of those people will come. Only organizations that can afford to send those few people will send them. And so there's also going to be that extra layer of having the vaccine passport or some other identification that says I'm allowed to be there and I'm able to be among people and not be a disease carrier. Virtual events right now have become the #1 marketing tool for in-person events. So we found a new role for virtual. It's going to help us bring people back. It lets them sample content online and then provides an uptick in registration. So I like what I see online. There's more in person. I want to go there and I want to be there. And what we found is that for online events, you're able to get 5 to 7 times the number of attendees online than in person. So it's a great marketing tool, and not always something we use, 2019 and earlier. And I think this quote from Bill Hornbuckle at MGM Resorts in Las Vegas, this industry will come back only when people feel it's safe to come back. That's what will happen. And that's what we have to focus on. How can we convince people we're safer, we're cleaner, we're healthier, we've got everything in place, that it's safe to come here. And until we can do that, we can expect our industry to be held back. But those are the things that we can do to change that. With that, I look forward to joining Walt and taking some questions. And Vali, thanks for having us here today.
Great, thank you very much, Norman. We're going to move to the question period right now. First, I would like to thank Marty Foster Walker for preparing the speaker gifts. Due to COVID, we will be directly sending the speaker gifts to your offices. So thank you, Foster Walker. And Norman and Walt are both prepared to respond to questions. So I will hand this over to Heidi. Thank you.
I hope I caught that question. It was hard to hear, but do you see Destination BC being more engaged in the meetings and events sector and working with Taya BC?
I'll repeat the question.
There
The
we go.
current crisis has highlighted the need for a more coordinated approach to marketing and advocacy as we move into the recovery phase for the meetings industry. Do you see Destination BC starting to engage more active marketing and sales of the meetings and events sector? Is TIAC BC interested in working with the meetings and events industry in the future?
So to answer the last question with Taya BC, we work very closely with the meetings and events sector, but it's really in an advocacy role, as I alluded to in my presentation, certainly trying to advance this notion of a restart plan for the sector at some point. And in any other areas that the sector requires advocacy, certainly we would be supportive of that. As for Destination BC, it's a difficult question for me to answer. It's best answered by DBC. I know they have great interest in the meetings and events sector. It's not something they've traditionally ventured into because there are so many other partners involved in the sector throughout the province as individual venues and meeting planners and a number of other companies. But it's certainly something that they've been supportive of, but I can't answer the question directly on their behalf. I haven't yet seen their new strategy, and they have a new CEO that's starting very soon who may have some different views. So that's the best answer that I can give at this point.
Thank you very much. Question to Norman. How should we position the BC meetings and events industry and destinations over the next 36 months? As many US destinations such as California and Texas are probably targeting many of our clients. If you were the tourism king of British Columbia, what would your strategy be?
Well, I harp back to this whole business of being safe. I can think of all kinds of countries in the world where I would not want to go in the next 12 months. I think Canada and British Columbia in particular have a good international reputation. So let's build on that. Let's build on the fact that we are safe, that we are eventually COVID-free if that's in the cards, but that we've got a very progressive and aggressive vaccination program. Because at the end of the day, it really is going to be vaccines more than anything that determines whether or not people think you're open for business. So the sooner we can get vaccinated, the better off we're all going to be. I think most Canadians during 2020 looked at the United States and sort of thought they were kind of crazy down there. You had outbreaks all over the place. I know when we booked that house in Scottsdale that I talked about, they wouldn't give us a refund at the beginning. They said, we'll keep your reservation open for a year. Well, that was okay till the border closed, and then the border stayed closed, and it stayed closed, and it stayed closed. Meanwhile, the state of Arizona was going through huge spikes in COVID because they just didn't appear to be organized or disciplined in the United States, where we were quite happy to wear masks down in Canada. In the United States, they took masks as some sort of political statement. And so we looked at them, they were kind of crazy, and we didn't want to go there in the first place. So that perception of how your country or your destination is doing from a public health perspective is really, really critical. And if I was king of tourism, I would be focusing on that issue before I'd be focusing on any of the pretty pictures about our mountains, lakes, rivers, streams, or restaurants.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I have one last question. I'm going to direct this one to Walt. There are many discussions in the chat about a vaccine passport. Which level of government should be leading this And should it be federal, provincial? And how can we address the privacy issue, especially with regards to personal health data?
Well, it should be both levels. First of all, it is a federal government decision, no question, and has been right since the start. They're the ones that have closed the border. At the same time, all the provinces and territories have huge influence on what the federal government does. And so we are talking with the province on a regular basis about talking to the federal government on a restart plan, as I alluded to earlier. And there are several components to a restart plan. I didn't get into the details, but it would include things like rapid testing, ubiquitous rapid testing that could take place before people leave their home country to come to Canada, while they're here, and again on their way home. But this notion of a vaccine passport is something that we're also pushing. We've actually been pretty aggressive talking to anybody and everybody in government about considering a vaccination passport. This whole idea too about privacy puzzles me in some ways, because if you are going to an African nation, you need shots. You need many of them. And you have to have proof of vaccinations when you arrive in that country, or they won't let you in. In fact, in some cases, won't even let you get on the plane to depart for those countries. So that's the extent of it. I don't think anybody is being asked to disclose all of their personal health information, but the fact that you are proven to have had a vaccine and or rapid testing, as Norman said in his presentation, that's going to be absolutely critical. And I think if that's the step we need to take, we need to continue to push very hard at the federal level that this be a consideration. Tourism only happens with the movement of people. And if we can't see the travel restrictions lifted, even while there has been widespread vaccinations, either here at home or from other countries, the UK, for example, I think will be fully vaccinated by the end of May. Why are we stopping people from arriving? So I think vaccination passports are critical, and it's not a matter of privacy. It's just something that's common sense.
Thank you very much, Walt. That was a very insightful answer, gave us a lot to think about. I have another question that's come in from Tom Stuhlberg. Thank you, Tom. I will let either of you take the question. It's not directed specifically. Sudden changes in regulations seem to be a major deterrent to making travel plans. Are we really going to be able to make concrete restart plans in this climate of uncertainty?
Well, I'll kick off there. And concrete plans, no. And let me backtrack a little bit there. In the United States, the cruise ship folks are looking to the government in the United States for permission to sail again. And they've done it on condition that if we have our crews vaccinated and if all of our passengers are vaccinated, can we sail? And if you talk to the cruise ship industry, they're taking bookings into late 2021, 22, 23, and doing very well. So people are optimistic. But would I make concrete plans? No. Two of my kids plan to go to Hawaii in November. They're confident they can go to Hawaii in November. And they asked if I wanted to go. And I said, sure, but I'm not booking until the week I go, because I'm not going through that episode that we went through in Scottsdale. I want to make sure that I can actually go for sure, and that if something happens, I can get my money back. So, that's how I'll be looking at making a concrete destination choice. It'll be much closer to in real time and not so far out. But concrete, no. But I think all of us realize that if vaccination trends continue in Canada, by the end of the summer, we will all be vaccinated. So what's the reason to hold back?
And I think restart plan in the context of industry is important, that we put all the elements in place now and put some markers down to which we can work towards. So if, for example, we're saying, as Norman just referenced, everybody is vaccinated by the end of the summer, what's to stop government from looking at, say, September 1st? Ideally, it would be sooner than that, but what's to stop government from saying September 1st is a target date for reopening travel lifting the domestic restrictions and then ultimately international using bubble zones or on a graduated basis. But here are the things that we need to put in place in order to allow that to happen. I talked about rapid testing, and Norman and I both mentioned vaccine passports, but are there other factors? Is it a certain threshold that we need to drop below in terms of COVID transmission, or more effective treatments, or what are those elements that would allow us to work toward that? So putting the strategy in place, but recognizing too, things could go sideways. Our vaccination program may not be as effective or as aggressive as we want it to be. And so anytime you put a marker down, you have to be prepared for that to change. But at the same time, you have to put the elements in place that allows all of us, industry and government, to work together to work toward.
Thank you very much. Oh, Norman would like to add some
Just,
comments.
just a note of optimism there. President Biden in the United States has told Americans that at the rate that they're being vaccinated, which is now about 3 million people a day, that they should be able to have barbecues at home on July 4th. And that's a huge marker in the ground, just mentally for people, because we've all been looking for some indication of when is this going to be over. And so for the president to say, look, get your vaccination and you can have a backyard barbecue on the 4th of July, that'll be our Independence Day. That's a huge thing, just mentally for people, that, you know, to be optimistic about the future. And I think we have every reason to think that here at home as well. I agree with Walt. If we're all vaccinated by the summer, what's holding us back for traveling in September?
Absolutely. And maybe we can celebrate July 1st here. One more question has just come in from Terry Russell. Thank you, Terry. Interesting question. If the U.S. cruise ship companies are successful in bypassing the Jones Act, is there a term on this so BC won't be harmed for years to come?
I don't know that it's going to happen. Certainly there is a lobby afoot, particularly by legislators in Alaska, to temporarily suspend the Passenger Transportation Act that would allow cruise ships to sail from Seattle straight to Alaska without a stop. I think Cruise Lines International, Canada and Northwest Division, has been active at both the Canadian and American government level to say, look, if cruises are allowed to sail out of Seattle, let's have a technical stop. That's a way around that. In other words, they would just anchor in Canadian waters. Nobody would get on, nobody would get off, et cetera. That's one way to deal with it. But I think if this lobby were successful, and as I alluded to, it's unlikely to be based on recent CDC decisions. But if it were, our fear is that it could be implemented on a longer term basis, and that would be a significant problem. Mind you, having said that, there's still great popularity to having cruises in Canada, sailing out of Vancouver and stopping in Victoria. There's a lot for the passenger that is an advantage, as well as to the cruise companies. Sailing out of Vancouver to Alaska is a day shorter than sailing out of Seattle. So it's not like we would lose cruise permanently, but on the other hand, we would lose a significant amount of business. And the cruise line industry in the United States is very powerful. And Seattle has grown leaps and bounds in recent years and taken a lot of business away from Vancouver. So it's a concern, to be sure, unlikely to happen, but something we have to keep our eye on, because should it happen, a lot of people will lose their jobs.
Thank you very much, Walt. Very insightful. And thank you both so much for participating in our question period. Over to you, Vali.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Walt and Norman. Your knowledge, practical tools, and support of the industry is truly appreciated. A lot to think about for all of us to start working on to restart our industry, hopefully sooner rather than later. As we move closer to restarting our industry, we must continue to create new and unique partnerships and clearly communicate what tools we need to effectively restart our industry. Taya BC, ILEA, PCMA, Fraser Valley Event Planners Association, and MPI are all here to support us. Let's provide them with an opportunity to do so. Thank you very much for joining us today. And the video of today's event will be posted online in approximately 2 weeks.